How do you do? My name is Henry Henderson, and I was the ship's carpenter on board Cutty Sark for, let me see now, 5 voyages from our maiden voyage onward. Our first 2 voyages to China and back were uneventful enough. Just the usual stuff, settling in of a new ship, making sure all the gear was working. It was in the 3rd voyage in the homeward run that Cutty Sark got into trouble. She might have ended up wrecked off the coast of South Africa if it hadn't been for me. We left Shanghai on the 17th of June 1872 with nearly 600 tons of tea in the hold. Everyone was keen to make a fast passage home. It was not that we'd been away that long. We'd left London only 4.5 months earlier. And the last voyage we'd been away for more than a year. But the reason why we wanted to make our fastest passage was the ship that was right behind us. The Aberdeen White Star Line's clipper, Thermopylae. There's no doubt that she was a fine vessel, but many people were saying she was the fastest of all the tea clippers. Naturally enough, our captain, old George Moody and his crew, we weren't going to stand for that. We knew Cutty Sark was quicker. Now, with Cutty Sark and Thermopylae leaving China exactly the same time, we had a chance to prove it. Every captain has their own favourite course, so we lost sight of Thermopylae pretty soon. But we caught another glimpse of her a couple of days later as we slipped past Hong Kong. Then we must have got ahead of her, because when we stopped at Anjar in the tip of Java to pick up mail, we saw her approach and sail on by. Once we got into the Indian Ocean, we flew. We were making 260 miles a day. I learnt afterwards that by the time we'd passed the southern tip of Madagascar and were heading for the Cape of Good Hope, Cutty Sark must have been 400 miles ahead of the Thermopylae. Then, on the 7th of August, it would have been about 54 days after we'd left Shanghai, the wind just died. It was as if it had been cut by a knife. We lay there, a couple of 100 miles off the coast of South Africa for 2 days. But if any of us had been praying for a wind, it would have been better if that prayer had been left unanswered. When the wind came, Lord, it was strong, and it was from the west, and with a big, big sea. We took in canvas, but the lower topsails in the fore and the mainmast were blown to shreds. It seemed it would never let up. All the helmsman could do was to try and keep the head to the wind. Then at 6:30 in the morning of the 15th, the sea rose up under the stern, picked up the rudder, and tore it out and away. So we had a ship that we couldn't steer. I tried putting a spare yard over the sterns to see if that would act like a steering oar, like you see in some Chinese boats, but the ship was just too big. Now, Robert Willis, who had taken a small share in the ownership of the Cutty Sark, he was on board. He'd taken the trip for the good of his health, and he tried to tell Captain Moody to make for the nearest port under sail alone. I suppose that would have been Port Elizabeth. Well, Captain Moody was not the kind of man you tell what to do, and Mr. Willis was lucky not to have been knocked down. Moody had made up his mind to repair the rudder at sea. So I set about making a new rudder. It's a sort of lash-up we call a jury rudder, from the spare spars and bits of timber I'd stowed for repairs. Now, and you can hardly credit this, we had a bit of luck. After we left Shanghai, we discovered that we had 2 stowaways on board, and one turned out to be a blacksmith. I set this fellow to making eye bolts, and he set up a little forge on deck. My idea was to fix 5 eye bolts into a new rudder and 5 into the rudder post, then push a bolt through them all to the hold, the rudder to the ship, but at the same time allow it to swing properly. The bolt was actually one of the metal posts that held up the awning over the poop deck. The whole contraption was to be controlled by chains. Now, if you can imagine setting up a forge in the deck of a ship, you can picture what was going to happen sooner or later. Yes, the whole thing tipped over. The captain's son, Alexander, was an apprentice on board and was helping the smith when a roll took the whole forge across the deck, covering him in red-hot cinders. He didn't make much of a fuss, but I believe he still bears the scars. Somehow, though, we got it all finished and we managed to hang this jury rudder, which was no simple task, but it worked. We were under way soon, even if progress home was pretty slow. When we finally reached London in mid-October, we found that Thermopylae had beaten us by 9 days. But you can't help but feel a bit sorry for Captain Kimball, Thermopylae's master, because no one talked about him beating us. All anyone talked about was how I'd saved the Cutty Sark with my jury rudder, and the ship owners gave me a handsome gift of £50 as a reward for what I'd done.
This is just one of the many stories of Cutty Sark that you can explore on the ship. She is now permanently docked in Greenwich, just 20 minutes from the centre of London. Come on board and discover why she is one of the most famous ships in the world.